The one thing that I would love strategists to do is just go down a rabbit hole. There's not enough time these days for rabbit holes, but they're really important. And you will find no better rabbit hole companion than a large language model. And really think about it as a way to open up the world of your own thinking, open up rooms of history and knowledge and philosophy and ways of looking at the world that like maybe you didn't know about.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of How I Strategy. I'm super excited to have one of my favorite people on, Jenny Nicholson. Jenny's been a creative in advertising for almost 20 years. She's been leading creative for brands like Sherwin-Williams, Pampers, MSNBC. She likes to joke that she's an advertising turduncan, which actually, Jenny, I forgot to tell you, this is the first time I've heard that word. So thank you for introducing.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
But yeah, she's an advertising turduncan, mind of a creative, heart of a strategist, and the obsession of a technologist. And as the Queen of Swords, she also brings all those skills to help brands and agencies do things they couldn't do before. So she's created a bunch of AI-powered brand experiences for Zola and Elf, and she's trained teams from Amazon and Wayfair on how to use AI differently. But she also has a bunch of side hustles and hobbies, which, I could list. There's a whole list of them I could go through, but one of her favorites, which I wanted to share, is that every January, she and her friend Alistair do Lab 31, where they create basically 31 AI-powered experiences in 31 days. And then my favorite fun fact about her also is that, well, first, she's an avid reader, so she reads about 100 books a year, which, Jenny, you have to join my book club. I forgot to tell you about that, so we'll make sure
please.
That happens.
I would like that very much.
But my favorite fun fact is she does read her Kindle in the shower. So that's a new one, and I love it. And so great to have you on, Jenny, and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, okay, I'll go ahead and get started with my favorite question to ask everyone, which, in your opinion, what does it mean to be a good strategist?
What does it mean to be a good strategist? I guess I'll say, because I don't know if I could say what it means, but I could tell you what I think it takes.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think to be a good strategist, I think it takes pattern recognition. I think you have to be able to look at what maybe seems like a bunch of disparate noise and see how different things connect that maybe other people wouldn't notice. I think to be a good strategist, you also have to really love humans. I think you have to really have a soft spot in your heart for humans. I think you have to find humans really interesting. What motivates them, what drives them, how they're the same, how they're different. And this may be a little bit weird, but I think a little bit of social anxiety helps too. Because, if you have a little social anxiety, that means you're used to being in a situation and there's always sort of a part of you that kind of like monitoring the situation to sort of see how everybody's flowing together. And I think that that quality of being a little bit of an outsider, even when you're inside something, means that you're always kind of studying your own kind, which I think is a superpower. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who has some social anxiety and that's my superpower, but I suspect I'm not.
No, absolutely not. I totally agree with you on that last point. I've always kind of have thought of strategists as generally maybe the people who used to be quote unquote weirdos, but like where now and they're at the point in their lives and their careers where that actually is a shining superpower to just like be that little bit weird and quirky and like you said, maybe a little socially anxious, whatever it might be. But 100% agree with that. But I love that.
Awesome.
Thank you. And I wanted to talk today, obviously, a lot about AI because you are someone who uses AI all the time in a bunch of different ways, really creatively. And there's a lot of interesting things I want to get into. But I think first to start off, I'd love to understand what do you think every strategy must understand about AI right now? And what do you think most still misunderstand?
I think one of the things that people sometimes get caught up in when it comes to AI is they think that the point of AI is AI. They're like, I got to go learn about AI because AI is an important thing and AI is a big technology. That's like being like, I'm going to go become an expert in like the lasso tool in Photoshop because the lasso tool is a really powerful tool. Which like it's a little bit of a cheap metaphor, but it's like, well, no, it's like, well, why? What does it mean? Right. What is it for? What do we do with it? What are we trying to achieve? And so one of the things that I've seen, because I think, one of the things I feel really strongly about kind of addressing very straight on is that there's a lot of fear right now in the world. There's a lot of fear in the world kind of in general, but there's a lot of fear in our industry when it comes to thinking about AI. And when when you stay really focused on AI in and of itself and having to learn it and having to know about it and having to work with it because it's this new technology that if you don't learn about it, you're going to be screwed. That's a really dangerous place to be in. And I think a lot of people are in that place. I know even I sometimes can get in that place when the news feels and the advancement and the changes feel like they're coming really fast. So I think that's sort of the misunderstanding that people have is they have to go learn about AI. I think the thing that I want every strategist to know is that AI is one of those things, like everything in life where you get out what you put in. And I think that strategists and divergent thinkers and creatives are actually really, really, really important because AI, I have seen that they are not training AI these days to be more creative. AI is increasingly getting trained to be better at long-range task completion, to be better at generating code that doesn't break over big quantities of data sets, which means that AI is getting trained to be right, to not make mistakes, to start out on a road, to give itself a to-do list and to not screw up on the way.
Right.
And that's, I think, anathema to the work that we do. And so one of the things that I have seen with every sort of release, and I'm curious if you've seen this too, because you've been working with these models for several iterations of them. I feel like they get smarter. They get smarter every time, but they lose a little bit of soul every time. And it takes a little bit more work. I've found with every iteration, it takes a little bit more work to sort of like bring them to these unexpected places, bring them to these sort of leaps, because they're getting trained to follow directions and to not mess up. And if you think about what you need to come up with an interesting insight, like a little weirdness and some willingness to sort of splash around in places that might be dead ends is really important. And so that's something that I think that creative humans are going to have to really keep bringing. Thank God.
Yeah, Jenny, no, I totally agree. And I think I really liked what you said also about, AI being a tool like any other where what you get out of it is what you put in. And I think of that, all the time with the say sort of garbage in, garbage out. That's kind of how I've always approached my interactions with AI over the last few years. And it's definitely been, a learning process on the type of specificity or prescriptiveness that I need to give to get to something interesting versus allowing the AI to actually wander and hopefully take us somewhere where that could be really interesting for us to explore further. But like you said, I do think like with these models being trained more and more to be quote unquote right and to follow directions better, we also have to get better at, giving directions in a way in which you want them to also be misinterpreted and, potentially break something in that way too. So I think we actually have to go we have to play the game that they're playing almost in a different way to get to those more creative outputs too as strategists using AI. Yeah. So yeah,
I love
I appreciate that.
I always think about how if you think about like AI, what it is it's sort of like a very simplistic way to think about it is like a Plinko, like that game from Price is Right, where the things are like and like each spot it hits is a token. And I like to think about the work that we do as creatives, and especially when we're building these complex workflows, because I do like building complex workflows, but a complex workflow is basically just the combination of a human creating constraints and the AI that runs through the constraints they've created. So I always like to think about if the AI is just sort of plonking down the probability, pathways to get to the output at the end. Like my job is almost to put in like pinball flippers that like hit it back, and so it bounces back over here a little bit and then it comes down and it's like, oh crap, I hit another one and it bounces over there, so that by the time it gets down to the end, it didn't just sort of fall right through the obvious pathway, but I kind of bounced it to these places that enriched sort of the shape of the space it was exploring and ended up somewhere that surprised even me. That's sort of the weird thing. It's like you're almost shaping the boundaries in a really interesting way. so that something unexpected can flow through the shape that you created for it, which is a very different way of thinking about sort of creativity and strategy. And it is sometimes really frustrating because you're like, why didn't that work? And it requires, I think, a lot more iteration than people expect. So when I always say, like, when somebody uses a Waldo workflow, like, it may feel like push button, get amazing result, but it's like, no, what's happening in the background is a result of months and months and months and months of work of like, well, that needs to be like 5% different here. What if we change? Well, that didn't work. Oh, let's change it like this. That didn't work. Like, it's actually a lot of human work in the background teaching the model how to find good insights, how to distinguish a signal from a noise, what to do with those signals once you find them. Like, it is very much in some ways like being a senior strategist or a creative director, but you're creative directing an intelligence that works so differently than humans. So it's a really neat thing, but I think that it's much more of a collaboration than maybe strategists would assume. And that I find that heartening. I'm like, they need us. They still need us. You might think 100%. They don't, but they do.
I totally hear what you're saying. And I think what's interesting also is what you just mentioned, it's a very different intelligence than humans in some ways. And I've been thinking about this a little bit too recently. And I know you and I have talked about this in the past as well. But humans, I feel, typically, or strategists, often, we're the type of scourers of information looking for every possible data point, right, to sort of sift through, find that nugget, whatever it might be. So having a bit of that kind of overload is, a classic environment the strategists find themselves in, where they're sort of wading through. Whereas with AI, and, that works really well for humans, and it can work really well for humans who can sort of find their path through to the end goal with that much information and data. But with AI, I think what's interesting is we tend to have, or a lot of strategists and, users of AI in general tend to misunderstand the purpose of context and how that can really not get you to where you actually want to go. I think there's such a misconception around the more context, the better, right? Like, more is more, whereas sometimes really like less is more, And I know you and I have talked about this, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what you think, but yeah, having that sort of information overload for a lot of AI actually produces much worse result a lot of the time. And I think that's something that's hard for humans to really wrap their head around when they're like, how could you possibly have a worse result with more information, right? Like, shouldn't that get you to a better place ultimately if you have more data? But, curious to hear what you think a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of funny. Like, we were talking about the saying, like, you get out what you put in. And I meant that in sort of a more like emotional sort of like, you have to show up and carry your weight part. But there is also an element in which you literally do get out what you put in. So anybody who's talked enough to me knows that, like, I have very strong feelings about the way ChatGPT handles memory. So ChatGPT turns memory on by default, buries the ability to turn it off like 3 or 4 settings layers down, makes it really hard for you to know that they're doing it, makes it hard for you to turn it off. And so what it's doing is it's collecting memories about you, and it's building this like little user profile. And that user profile of you is getting injected into every single conversation that you have, which maybe is a great thing. Some people like that. And I have no issue if that's what you like, that's what you like. But for me, I'm like, the model can't be like, all right, I'm only going to pay attention to the 3 bullet points in this user profile that are relevant to the work that we're doing right now. That's not how it works. Anything that's in the context is in the context and shapes what it does. And even a single word, like, I was working on something, my friend and I'm really excited. We just launched this thing that's starting in October called the Spell of the Month Club.
Ooh.
And I'm really excited about it. And so the spell that we're working on is about fear and helping you with fear. And one of the things that I found is I wrote in the prompt, it said, turn creative fear into creative fuel. And I was like, do I really want it to be creative fear? Or do I want it to be fear in general? So I took out creative. I turned fear into fuel. Claude was like, nope, I won't run it. It was like, I hit the safety thing. And then I put back both of the creatives. And this is like 2 words in like, 8,000 character prompt, right? And it was like, nope, hit my safety triggers, I put back in the 2 words, and it was like, let's do it. I was like, okay, let me just take out one creative. And I think I took out the first one. I said fear into creative fuel, and it was like, nope, can't run it. Then I was like, what if I just take out the second one and I keep creative fear into fuel? And then I was like, okay, I'll run it. And that's the thing. I'm like, okay, if just 2 words can make that big of a difference, having a big old user profile of you blobbed into the beginning of everything, how is that influencing what you're getting out? And one of the things that I really love about sort of agentic systems and workflow systems like Waldo is that I'm allowed to control it, right? So one thing I always give as an example, and Romy, you've heard me yammer about this before, is like, if you take an agent and you tell the agent that its job is to make an audience persona, right? A persona of your target customer. I'm always like, you cannot tell the model what brand they're doing it for. You cannot tell the model what brand that agent, you can't tell the agent what brand that persona is being made for. Because what ends up happening is it ends up making just like the brand in like a customer persona skin suit that's like, hello, I am exactly what the brand thinks I am. So you actually have to be like, okay, what do I want this model to know at this point? But even more importantly, what don't I want the model to know?
Right.
And like, what information do I want the model to know when? And how do I sort of make sure that I'm orchestrating what agent knows what when, so that you're getting something that is actually really interesting and unique. And that's a lot of work. Yeah. And so when people say like context engineering, which is sort of the new cool thing, that's really what they're saying, is like really thinking strategically about what the model needs to know when, and what you're asking it to do with it, and where it's going from there. Then everybody likes to make things sound more complicated than they are.
And no, absolutely. It's like the fancy buzzword per usual and all of that. But no,
I mean, it's hard. It is hard.
Definitely.
But it's not anything new other than what we do all day long, is figure out who needs to know what, when, and why.
It's very true. I mean, that's like human systems all over in so many different ways too. And you're pulling different levers. And it's like working with the AI in that same way too. And I'm curious, on sort of a related note, how do you think about, in terms of what the model needs to know and when, how do you think about data sources when you're working with AI?
I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting and what I love about AI is that our idea of what counts as data is so much bigger now. It can be so much bigger, right? Because it used to be like data was numbers, right? Or if you had qualitative data, you had to sort of run some special computation to turn it into quantitative data. Like, it was hard to process, right? Like, you had to have humans like to really do like qual right, like to do like social science research. You have humans who are supposed to be coding things, and that takes time. And so I think one of the things that's really neat is that if data is a substrate of information within which there are many patterns, if you know what to look for, then anything becomes data, right? Your email is data, your meeting transcripts are data, like everything is data. And I think that's pretty interesting. The question then is like, well, what are you looking for?
Right.
What are you looking for? And how do you look? And how do you teach a model that isn't you, that doesn't know what you care about, that doesn't know what you look for? How do you teach it to look the way that you do without, and I think this is really important, like without just letting it do it for you.
Yeah.
Like, I think really deciding as a human sort of what belongs to you, or how you know what you know, is really important. I just saw this really fascinating study they did the other day where they found that not even just in writing, but in conversational podcasts like this one, ChatGPT words like delve and meticulous, they actually processed using large language models, I should say. They processed the transcripts of podcasts over like several years. and they sort of map the introduction of ChatGPT, and then you see in casual human conversation
how those
the
I'm guessing
uptick
how
of
those
these words
yeah
are making it not into our writing because people are writing with ChatGPT. They're making it into our language because we're interacting and collaborating with this technology, and this technology is influencing our brains in ways that are showing up in our casual conversations with other people. It's sort of like I worked once with a woman who was from South Africa. And whenever I worked with her, I'd find myself being like, I quite like this one. I was like, when have I ever used the phrase I quite? But she used it, and I just kind of picked it up. And it's very interesting to think that as humans, we think that like, because this thing on the other side of the experience of the conversation isn't real, that it doesn't have an impact on us. So that's just really that whole space of, the Marshall McLuhan, like, first we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. That side of things is really interesting to me. And I think as strategists, I'm guessing it's really interesting to all of us. And maybe we just, maybe some of us who've spent a lot more time talking to these weird things have had more time to think about that. But I would love for more strategists to be thinking about that, about how these are becoming real relationships, and not in a sketchy like way that the New York Times articles were about, where like people kill themselves at the end. But like these are actual collaborations that are changing the way that we act in the world.
Right.
I think that's really fascinating.
No, I 100%, know what you're talking about, in the sense that I have even noticed in myself, having spent a few years now working daily with AI, that, certain habits have been adopted by so many people across so many different use cases with AI. And I know for a lot of people, that chat conversational interface is something that they've gotten really used to when working with AI, right? And I think that's like made its way, to your point, into casual interactions you have, even spoken interactions in so many different ways. For me, what's funny is because Waldo actually started with just our workflows for the most part, which are very structured research outlines. To your point, it's like you put in a couple of words and you hit launch, and it looks like you just get out magic, right? But in the back, there's actually tons and tons of predetermined steps, so many different types of research and questions being asked, all of that. And it wasn't, and it isn't a chat interface. And I got really used to working with AI in the way in which I thought about everything in a way in which, I was like, oh, I have to build the scaffolding around how I actually want to have something come out, right? And chat was not a way in which, of course, I worked with other models and I've experimented and things like that, but that sort of conversational interface, I feel like I have had a different experience from a lot of people in the last couple of years who've gotten so used to chatting with their AIs, whereas I've been like, no, I actually tell my AI everything that I want it to do with a number of different steps first, and then I just hit launch, with one input or something like that. So it's funny how like that type of habit gets built so so subtly and so powerfully over time that you don't even realize. And then, we heard from our users, for example, that they wanted to be able to chat with Waldo, which totally makes sense. And at first I couldn't really understand.
And you were
why.
like, why?
I was like, why would you want to chat with Waldo? Like, I was like, you have all the workflows. That's everything you could possibly need. No. But of course it makes total sense. And there's always, edge cases that need to be kind of addressed through chat, in the way in which that workflows are a lot more rigid in their in the type of input that they're expecting. So, we've since launched our strategy agent to have that kind of conversational interface for our users. But it is really funny to have had such a different experience from everyone. And I know that that's something that you too, like, I know we were talking actually recently, one of the most more recent conversations we had with kind of the rise of agents and how you feel about that too. Actually, if you don't mind talking about it a little bit, I think it's a really interesting interaction.
Yeah. I think one of the things that is interesting is I'm a relational thinker, right? I've been a creative for 20 years, and creatives, in the way I grew up, is you don't work by yourself, you work with a team. I like to think out loud. I blabble out all kinds of random ideas, and like, I like to have a partner who can help me figure out what's trash and what's good. And but at its core, I really like being on a team. I really like being in a partnership. I really like having something to bounce off of, right? I love playing tennis, and I love playing tennis with a backboard. Like, that's fun to me. But I don't like being on what do you call that? Elliptical machine where I'm just alone going forward. And so for me, this sort of agentic model, it hurts my heart a little bit. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to push a button and I'm going to send my agent, and my agent's got all these parallel sub-agents. Like, I'm working in Claude Code right now, working on these sort of multi-level agentic structures. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to be the head of a factory of agents that have agents that have agents, and they do all the work and they bring it back to me and they're like, here, my master, we have done all this work for you. Like, I don't know if that's a world that I really want to live in. And so I think that's going to be really interesting for all of us, is we're going to have to each sort of decide where is the road that we want to go down?
Yeah.
What do we need to know to be successful? But also, what's going to actually work with the way that we like to work, right? Because of course, the private equity firms of the world are fully autonomous agents and do all the things that require no humans. Like, of course they want that, right? Of course they want that. But I'm not sure that's what the world actually wants. And I think it'll be really interesting, to see as we get to, it's what do you need? And what do you need AI to do? What is better done by these amazing sort of pattern recognition intelligences? And what's better done by a human, right? So one of the things that I think is really neat and what I love about Waldo is I don't have time to go scour the four corners of the internet to find all of the things. I don't want to spend vast quantities of my day scrolling through TikTok because I think it makes my brain feel it's not good for my brain. So if I can send Waldo out to go scour these things, and I can teach it to look for the things that I want it to look for, and then it brings me back what it finds, then I can do with that whatever I want. I might decide that I want it to have some ideas based on it, but I don't have to take them. And I can be like, oh, but I like that little thing there, or I like that bit there, and I'm going to take it. But, I'm finding myself, one thing I'm actually doing more of is I'm writing more. I'm writing my journal every single day. I've been doing morning pages because it's for me, writing is thinking. Yeah. And also I'm a writer. And so I've never actually used AI to write for me, because why would I do that? That's my special thing. That's my special thing. And so I think that's really gonna be sort of an interesting thing, is we all sort of have to figure out what are we comfortable delegating? What do we, for better or worse, what are we gonna have no choice but to delegate? Right?
Right.
And what do we want to hold on to, and what can we do that no algorithmic pattern recognition thing, smart as it might be, can do that we can do. And in some ways, I think, as a creative, you can be really scared, but I'd be way more scared if I was a radiologist than if I was a creative.
Totally.
My biggest fear is that creative thinkers, lateral thinkers. And if you're a strategist, you're a creative. If you work in an advertising agency, you're a creative. If you weren't, you would have a much simpler life working at an insurance company. And I think there's, like I said, there's a lot of fear, and it keeps people sort of they cross their arms and they're like, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to touch that. That's yucky. I don't want to touch it. And I'm a little bit I totally get that. But also, if you don't, then you don't know, you won't know what it is. You won't know how it works, and you won't be able to actually have a say in what it becomes.
And how it deploys all of
right
that.
now, they're little babies. Right now, they're little babies learning the ways of the world from the people who use them. And if creative people aren't using them, if creative people aren't understanding them, if creative people aren't in the mix, then we're not going to actually have a seat at the table when the decisions get made about the role they play in the world. And I feel really strongly about that.
No, and I 100% agree with you on that. I think we need knowledge and skill sets from every type of person out there in the world to be interacting with these tools to, literally train them so that hopefully, like you said, you'll have a say in how this technology ultimately evolves and where we actually go from here. But no, I appreciate that. And actually, I would love to kind of segue into, since you mentioned teaching, quote unquote, teaching Waldo to go out there and do what you wanted to do with our kind of our structured workflows, and then, spitting back what you get and, going from there. I'd love to actually see maybe one of the workflows that you've been working on recently and talk through together, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So let me share my screen. Where are you? So this is a workflow that I've been working on in Waldo, that what it does is it is called the proactive ideation workflow. And what it does is it goes and looks for a couple of different sources to just find some interesting patterns of what's going on in the world. So I think right now there's like a trendhunter.com source. I think this is the In Good Co Substack. This is Casey Lewis's after school Substack. And so what it does is it goes and it finds some interesting patterns. It tries to dig beneath the trends themselves to find the underlying sort of human truths and patterns below that. And then it sends those identified patterns to this creative lab that comes up with 3 ideas. And then the creative lab and all the trend hunter reports get sent to this report writer that puts it together into a document. So I've been working on it. And so you put it in for any brand. This one is, I believe it was for, the brand is Target. The audience is college students, and the moment is Halloween.
Oh,
and
love
so
it. Halloween's coming up soon.
Yeah. So it identifies the patterns, and it's really interesting because every time it does it slightly different. This is not deterministic technology. This is probabilistic. Right. So one of the things it's supposed to be doing is it's supposed to be outputting in JSON. And you see here that it is not outputting in JSON. It is outputting in Markdown, which is fine. Having nested information for the model is really important because they think in probability. So the more that you can sort of, instead of just giving a flood of words that are all at the same level, the more you can use sort of structure and nesting and hierarchies to help it sort of travel through the context that you're giving it is really, really important. Markdown, JSON, whatever. So you see here, sober, curious socializing. And then it gives an example, this Hydro Ice by Magnum, a glow-in-the-dark vitamin C enriched ice pop for sober socializing. The rising importance of lore for branding. You have here from Casey Lewis, we have nostalgia-driven tech reversion, which is that because schools are banning iPhones, kids are bringing in iPods. That. Yeah, a lot of schools are banning iPhones.
Wow.
Because they're bad for teenagers and children. We've all come to understand. But so now students are bringing in iPods and Walkmans so that they can listen to music still.
Wow.
Anyways, it's talking about the increasing pace of trends turning over. So it's talking about how Labubus, they paid all this money to launch Labubus, and now we have a glut of Labubus in the market. And then the creative lab generates distinctive yet executable ideas. Are these any good? I don't freaking know. I haven't looked yet. All right. So this one, and you see here, this one's actually in JSON. So this one is the Haunt Your Homework Targets Midnight Study Ghost Hunt. It says where it came from, how to execute it, some cute ideas about it, when to launch it, if it's an interesting idea, how scalable it might be. This next one is Cursed Cart Challenge, targets haunted shopping roulette. Students get random cursed carts filled with mystery Halloween items. Keep what you want at 50% off. The patterns it came from, why it's disruptive, how to execute it, how much it costs, how to do it. Retro horror sleepover target after dark. I don't know how logically it would make sense to have a bunch of college students spending the night in your Target, but it's really funny because I've been thinking a couple months ago, I used to do these things when I was a kid called lock-ins, and I was like, does anybody do lock-ins anymore?
I used to do those too.
Well, apparently on social now, September's the big it's the lock-in season, and everybody's talking about it. So anyways, and then this report writer I was working on, takes all of it and puts it together in a nicely formatted markdown report. So what we're seeing, it says, this is the landscape. Here are some of the trends, what to do about it. It breaks down the different ideas. And then I just added this thing right beforehand because I'm like, it's not interrogating these ideas enough. So then it says, here are the ideas. The haunt your homework idea is the most interesting. The curse challenge idea is cool for this reason. This one's cool for that reason. Here are some of the opportunities that it missed. And what I'll do often is I will run this workflow 47 different times, each time going back and tweaking something. I might tweak the source. I might tweak the prompt that tells the model what to do. I might tweak the model that's actually doing the work. So one of the things is initially I had a OpenAI model running the creative section. OpenAI models are the least creative of them all. So then I was like, well, let me try Claude Haiku. And Haiku was good, but it was like being a little bit literal. So I'm like, let me try Sonnet. And I was like, okay, I actually like Sonnet's ideas.
There we go.
And so I might change the model, or I might also change what's getting flowed from one part of the workflow to another. And so that's the thing that I think is really interesting, is that you have all of these little levers, and so much of it really is, it's not magic. It's like being at the eye doctor, except you're measuring the outputs to like raise the taste level.
Right.
And you're reverse engineering to say, if I do this, does it make what comes out feel more interesting or less interesting? And you do that over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until you get something consistent.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's like you said in the beginning, I think the biggest takeaway for me from working with AI for the last few years, and probably for you and for a lot of other strategists, is that this process is so iterative. It's a constant, go back in, tweak a little something here. To your point, like 2 words can make such a big difference. So I find it to be a really fun and interesting challenge to be like, which lever can I pull today? What can I do here? But thank you so much for walking us through that. That was awesome. I'm going to be using that workflow. I hope you don't mind.
No, I don't.
But it looks amazing. Amazing. And I know we have to wrap up, but I did just want to throw in one quick question from the audience. Which is a great question, and something that hopefully you'll be able to give some practical advice on. But someone is wondering, what is just one small thing that you'd recommend that a strategist can start doing today to use AI more effectively? So speaking to all the people who might be a little bit scared or nervous, how can they get started?
I think one thing that I want strategists to think about doing is instead of issuing a command, open whatever model you want and ask a question. Ask a question. One of my favorite ones is, say you're working on a brief, right? It's really tempting. And like the way you would think you would use AI is be like, here's my audience, here's my contacts, give me a brief. And then you get a brief and it's kind of a shitty brief. I always think if instead you say, here's my audience, here's my brand, here's my context, what are 10 frameworks that I could use that would help me look at this challenge? And what I think is really cool is then the model will be like, oh, well, if you use the jobs to be done framework, the challenge will look like this. If you use the design thinking framework, the challenge will look like this. If you use the blue ocean framework, the challenge will look like this. And what I think is kind of neat is like, you can do that like 18 different rounds. You could do that, and you don't even have to ask for strategic framework. You can ask for like broader frameworks. You can ask for scientific frameworks. And what I think is kind of neat is every time I do that, there's always some framework that I did not even know existed, that was not even in my brain. And I can be like, oh, well, what is that framework? How does that framework work? Where did it come from? And so I think the one thing that I would love strategists to do is just go down a rabbit hole. Go down a rabbit hole, because there's not enough time these days for rabbit holes, but they're really important. And you will find no better rabbit hole companion than a large language model, and really think about it as a way to kind of open up the world of your own thinking and sort of open up rooms of history and knowledge and philosophy and ways of looking at the world that like maybe you didn't know about. That's my favorite way to use it.
That's awesome. And I think actually it's funny that you say that, because I think starting from, or going back to where we started in our conversation of what makes a good strategist, I think one of the things we sort of danced around but didn't quite touch on is, just people who are naturally curious. So I would hope that, just going in and getting started by just asking questions should be the easiest and most natural thing for a strategist to be able to jump in and start to do today to, hopefully get something exciting out.
I
and start
love
to use
that.
AI in their work.
I love that. And just in
Yeah.
general, like following your curiosity, I think is really powerful, because right now, I don't know, I know I keep banging on about this, but it feels so important. It can be easy right now to feel very disempowered. It really can. There's a lot going on in the world that makes you be like, do I even have anything useful? What do I have to offer? What makes me special? Am I going to be replaced? Do I, there's this sense that like, I have to learn how to use AI so that I will be competitive, so that I don't lose my job. And that is not a ground from which you can do anything good. That is not a ground from which you can learn. That is not a ground from which you can grow. So I think really waking up each morning and being like, what am I curious about? One tiny little thing, one tiny little tool, one tiny little button, one tiny workflow in Waldo to be like, what does this one do?
Right.
And stop there. Not, I need to figure out what this one does because I need to know how to use it, because if I don't know how to use it, this thing and that bad thing will happen to me. But just literally like, what does this do?
Yep.
Let's find out. I think it's just a great place to start. And I think it's going to lead you where you need to go without some of the like misery that the world wants to put on us all right now.
Absolutely. No, I think it's the best and most positive way of looking at where we are, especially for strategists just starting to jump into AI. It's just a place to ask questions. Just go ask your questions and then see where you go from there. So
yes,
I'm excited about that in the future for sure. But thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us. It was great to have you on. And hopefully I'll get to see you soon in person too. Maybe in Paris if you feel like coming over to visit, or maybe I'll come to Durham.
Yeah, stand by. I'm on my way.
Amazing. Thank you.